All right, guys. Hello. Welcome to APR History through Zoom. I'm recording a Zoom meeting, so instead of what we would do on Friday, where we would meet and I'd go over the pieces and all that stuff, I'm just gonna have you guys watch a video of me, right? So it'll be less personal, so no me questioning you and all of that stuff. It's just gonna be me going over some of these pieces. We're falling a little behind, so I didn't want to give you guys anything to do that would kind of keep us behind. What we're gonna do here is we're going to go over the last few pieces of Romanticism today. So we've got two more paintings, and we've also got the introduction of photography, and also we are also working on what's the other piece? Architecture, Westminster. So anyways, so that's the four things we're going to cover today. That's what we would have done on Friday. What you'll do is you'll watch this video. I'm going to have a few discussion questions I'm going to generate out of these things just to make sure you guys watch the video. All right. I will also post those onto Google Classroom this evening, and you guys can check those out. All right. So they're only giving me 40 minutes. So I've got to move kind of quickly. So I am going to share my screen with you guys so that you guys can see what we're doing today. So I'm going to move this over here. All right, so today we're going to finish out the Romanticism, all that stuff. If you guys remember, right, we've been looking through Romanticism. We've been looking at, essentially how Romanticism compares to the Renaissance, how it compares to how it's kind of a critique of neoclassicism, all that stuff. So if you guys remember when we were looking at Pine, right, P-I-N-E, the N stands for nature. Yesterday we looked at a lot of E, right? So today we're going to look at a lot of the N. And this is, there's a lot of nature involved in these first two pieces. So this is what we call the Oxbow. And this is taken from, right, this image right here in what would be Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts today. And so this is the Oxbow, and this is kind of what the end product is. But this is what the author was referencing, right, is this right here. Just wanted to kind of share that with you guys right now. So as you look, right, we've got kind of two separate things going on. We've got, you notice that the painting is almost kind of cut in two. This is very common of the Hudson River School. The author of this painting, who is Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole headed this painting group that was very popular, the Hudson River School of Art in New York. And lots of Hudson River pieces are kind of scattered all over the United States. In fact, there's a few different Hudson River Valley schools of art in the Orlando Museum of Art. And so you can see some of these pieces that are similar to this. But this piece is actually cut in two here. And you can see here the dark clouds, right? You see kind of nature taking its course, right? Over here on the left, you've got dark cloudy skies. On the right, you've got clear open skies. And really, this is all about nature, right? And you really kind of see how nature takes its course. And then of course right here, I don't know if you guys can see, you've got tiny little Thomas Cole. He depicts himself in this this image actually. Let's see right there. There he is, painting the piece, right? He kind of hides himself in the image, kind of funny. Right in there, right? He's painting that palette. So he's kind of doing what we're doing, right? So, all right, so this is view from Mount Holyoke, right, in Massachusetts today after a thunderstorm. So this is referred to as the Oxbow because the river is making an oxbow, okay? And basically, this is a good example of Romanticism due to the obsession with nature that we see here with many Romanticists oil on canvas. As you guys can see, though, this painting is kind of divided into two sections. You have the Romantic on the left, right, and the classical landscape on the right. Romantic is very dark, it's dreary, right? It's emotional. And the classical landscape on the right, where everything is geometric and everything is just right. So the continent is filled with life based on, a real life area, in Massachusetts. And another thing that I want to make sure you guys understand, you're going to see this in this piece and the next piece, is one thing that the Romanticists were really obsessed with was the sublime, not the band Sublime. The band Sublime is pretty awesome, but they're obsessed with the sublime view of land, right? The word sublime, it kind of gives off this idea that we are, it's almost this kind of, we're beyond human rationality, right? Um, and, uh, and so this is kind of the idea that we get. It's this kind of laid back, almost like surrealistic kind of idea of land. So this shows the sublime view of land, untouched by man, the wild, the untamed, right? This is that left-hand side. Again, Romanticism, right? Now, on the other side, you have this very light touch of human, right? Humans are now involving themselves, right? You've got agriculture, you've got industry. So what's interesting about this piece is, right, it was actually going down to the function, right? It was painted as a reply to a British book that basically was saying that Americans, as they moved out west, right, they're destroying the wilderness, with industry, that they're destroying, man is building, all these things, and it's just, destroying land. And this is kind of showing, look, yes, we're moving out west. Yes, we're building. However, industry is not affecting nature. Nature still runs its course. Nature still, Mother Nature still dictates and guides everything that we do. So that's kind of what's going on here. So anyways, like I said, he even has a little self-portrait in the foreground, right? Amid that dense forest, that wild landscape. Again, it's the sublime. Here he is, just enjoying nature in the midst of all of this, chaos on the left side, right? So it's definitely, this is a good example of, sublime being here. So the functionality, right? Not only is it kind of a reply to that British book, but it does show respect for nature. It shows that, it does show that humans are still insignificant, and that nature still dominates. Nature still controls things, right? And that's kind of what they're getting into. So humanity insignificant, nature still prominent, right? Again, like I said earlier, this is the leader, the founder of the Hudson River School. This is a very, very popular, which will become a very powerful and influential group, especially when it comes to kind of landscape art. These were great Romanticist artists of the United States. And it was painted in 1836. This is an early Hudson River School painting. This guy's the founder, and this art school continued for years. This was a very large painting as well. It was painted for an exhibit and also painted for the National Academy of Design. So he made this very large. And most of the time, most of these pieces were, maybe, 4 to 6 feet by 3 to 5 feet. This was a little bit bigger. And lastly, this is that element of the 19th century belief in manifest destiny. The Americans believe we're moving out west. We're going west. We're exploring. We're venturing out. We're going to see what nature holds in store for us, right? This is our God-given right to do this. And so manifest destiny, if God intends for us to do it, then we're going to do it, right? So that is the Oxbow in a nutshell. All right, so let's move on. Now we move on to a little more controversial, even more controversial piece, right? This is Joseph Mallard William Turner, or JMW Turner. Turner is the slave ship guy. That's kind of what he's known for. This particular guy wrote a poem, which I'll show it to you right now, actually. I'll start with that. So he wrote this poem. This poem becomes very influential. It's called "The Fallacies of Hope," and this is the poem here. Aloft all hands, strike the top masts and belay. Yon angry setting sun and fierce edged clouds declare the typhoon's coming. There's a storm coming, right? Before it sweeps your decks, throw overboard the dead and dying. Ne'er heed their chains. Hope, hope, fallacious hope. Where is thy market now? And so this deals with, obviously, the slave trade. And, you know, in my world history class, you know, we talk about just the brutality of this slave trade, just how awful it is. I mean, I always tell kids, this is the height of human brutality. The slave trade is the absolute, if you want to know how horrible we can be as human beings to each other, the slave trade is that. I mean, absolutely one of the worst atrocities that humans have ever committed against each other. So this particular piece is based off of that poem, but also a book in which there was a scandal. Basically, the way it would work is, so slaves were insured by you know, if they fell off, if they basically died on board, if they were thrown off a ship, you know, or I'm sorry, if they died, they were insured, you know. However, if they were sick and they showed up sick, they were not insured for sickness. And no slaver was going to bring a sick slave to the markets. And so what they would do is, and this is just, it's disgusting even just uttering this out of my mouth, but what they would do is they would actually throw any sick slave, they'd throw them overboard because then they could get insurance money for that. So they actually made more money throwing human beings overboard than they did selling sick slaves. Absolutely incredible, right? Just disgusting. And J.M.W. Turner wants to shows that. This is during the time of abolition, by the way. This is shortly after Olaudah Equiano writes his famous piece, where he talks about his life as on board these ships in the Middle Passage, right? This is a great example of the Middle Passage. And so what you see here is a typhoon coming, much like the poem, right? And so these slaves are being thrown overboard. They've gotten sick from the waves, and they've been thrown overboard. So I don't know if you guys can see. I mean, there's tons of, you know, human bodies that have been thrown lifeless overboard. I mean, again, this is one of the worst atrocities ever committed, and human beings did this, right? You can see the sun in the background, right? Kind of this blood red sun, also kind of to give some symbolism, right? So anyways, but yeah, a good example of Romanticism, again, this idea of the sublime enhancing dramatic impact, right? You see the sublime there, you know, the red sun, the oncoming typhoon. It's like we're watching, you know, this whole thing go down, and it's just horrible, right? Absolutely awful. It is oil on canvas, right? So obviously, as far as form goes, you got the ship, you can see hands, you can see chains. They're all reduced in size. They're made small, and they pale in comparison with the mightiness of this turbulent seascape, right? It's very hard to see the slaves in chains, but it's there, and because the artist wants you to see just the mightiness of the ocean and the storm that's coming in. He uses very rich emotional colors in this piece. You notice no light pastels here. This is not Rococo art where they're using pastel hues that are playful. Nothing playful about this piece. I mean, this is brutal. You guys have noticed every single piece of the Romantic art, it's brutal, right? Whether it's, you know, the Goya piece, whether it's Liberty Leading Your People, whether it's, you know, this last piece that we just saw, you know, I mean, this piece especially, this is brutal, right? And it's very emotional, and that's what the Romantic artists are looking for, right? So the colors are very important. They use very emotional colors here. Even the brushwork is very loose, right? I mean, if you guys look, this is very loose, rapid brush strokes, as you guys can see. Now, this will be an element. This is of something of the Impressionist movement, which we'll get into next week. But a lot of the art that we see here is very typical of Impressionist art, right? There's a lot of elements of that Impressionist art. So this is like 20 years before Impressionism even becomes a thing. So they're, you know, Turner's kind of ahead of his time here with this loose, rapid brushwork, right, of the paint. Again, you get that beautiful seascape. that's what you see at first, but when you look close, you see those slaves drowning and they're being eaten alive by the fish. And so this is nature responding to the inhumanity of the slave trade. You know, this is nature taking its course. Nature can be brutal, right? Much like human beings can as well, right? Um, so yeah, so that's what's going on. Disease is broken out. They've thrown these slaves all overboard, right? And they want that insurance money. You know, money is the motivator for what they did. I mean, it was all about making money, and that's the absolute epitome of greed, right? To kill people for greed. I mean, or for money. That's just the ultimate, right? So anyway, but the functionality, this is a political, it's a social activist piece. This is a guy that's pushing for abolition of slavery. And this is when in Britain, the movement is happening, right? It is going on. So this was created to push people to push for abolitionism. This gave people a visual to say, hey, look, this is what's going on. Remember, they didn't have movies, they didn't have TV. So this is the best art form they had, and it works because the abolition of slavery will happen not long after this. Like I said, it was inspired by a true story, the Zong, which is a slave ship, in a book, and I talked about that. Slaves were insured, all that stuff. This was exhibited at the Royal Academy, which was a very influential exhibition. And again, kind of like the salons in France, you know, if your work could get into the Royal Academy, that was very, very influential. And so he was able to do that. So again, this again it is a political piece, much like we've seen a lot of these romantic movement pieces, trying to push for the abolition of slavery. All right. Speaking of the abolition of slavery, the guys that were able to push through the abolition of slavery were the members of this place right here, members of the British Parliament. This is what we call the Palace of Westminster. This is one of the most recognizable structures in all of London. And remember what I told you about that romantic art, right? It's all about bringing back this pining for the past, right? This longing for the past, especially the Gothic past. And so here, guys, oh my goodness, look at this Victoria Tower. Can you say Gothic art, right? Got the verticality of Gothic art, right? For sure. Same thing here with Elizabeth Tower. You got Big Ben over here, which is, you know, probably the most famous part of Westminster. I mean, this is all hello Gothic art, right? The exterior of this is all about this kind of bringing back this revival of the Gothic art of the 1300s, so pre-Renaissance. So there were two artists, right? You had your Gothic artist, which was A.W.N. Pugin, who designed a lot of the exterior, as you guys can see here. And then Charles Barry, who took on more, he was more of the classical architect. He's going to be responsible for a lot of more of the classical elements that you'll see. Most of that interior. It's more of a classical interior and more of a Gothic exterior is what you're going to see with the Palace of Westminster. So two specific parts of the Palace of Westminster is the central lobby, okay? And in the central lobby, you'll see a lot of statues, right? You've got the little arches, right? Which is the classical touch there. There's a few other things that we'll talk about too later. So I've got to move. Well, you have 40 minutes. Zoom's only giving me 40 minutes today. Plus, I don't want you guys on here for too long anyway. Then you've also got Westminster Hall. And again, you got the kind of the flying, almost the flying verticality, right, of the hall, which you've got Gothic art, elements there of that Westminster Hall. Also, the Westminster Hall is actually the only original structure that's still standing from the 1300s, because the original Westminster Palace was actually built in the 1300s, and it did include nothing but Gothic art. Then it burned down to fire later on, and they're like, okay, we need to rebuild this. Well, how do we rebuild it? Well, let's just make it Gothic again. So we see this revival of the Gothic art. So this is Gothic revival, right? And but this is the Westminster Hall is the original, the only part that did not burn down. So they kept this, and if you ever go to there, this is the oldest part of the palace, the only part of this, the original. Here is the floor plan of the Houses of Parliament, right? So just so you guys know where the central lobby is, it's number 10, central lobby, because it's in the middle, right? Wow, it's incredible how that works, right? So that is in the middle there. And then Westminster Hall is 13 down here, the biggest, the longest hallway in the whole structure. And that's the only part, like I said, that did not burn down, right? So Big Ben, so where is that in relation to Big Ben? Big Ben's over here, right? Big Ben, again, was added later. So in case you were wondering there. Of course, you know, this is the House of Commons 15 right there is where the House of Commons meet, right? They still do to this day, right? And then the House of Lords, they meet over here in 7. So the central lobby, right, is kind of what connects the House of Commons and the House of Lords, right? So they would, if you want to go from one place to the next, you would follow through that hallway. And again, in the central lobby, this is also where you know, members of parliament would meet their constituents in that big central lobby there. This is where people would meet and gather, and you would talk about, you know, the politics of the day. And by the way, they still do. I'm sitting here talking like they used to. They still do this, right? This hasn't changed. This is where the legislation goes down, man, in England. This is where they make the laws. So all right, so again, this is good examples of Romanticism, right? And essentially what it is, it's a modern office building is what it is. I mean, that's what this whole palace is. But it's got that Gothic exterior, this Gothic revival, which is very romantic. You see this a lot, and a good example is right here in the House of Parliament. It is largely made of limestone masonry and glass, which again, that's what most of this stuff was made of back in, you know, the 1200s. You see this profusion of a lot of Gothic ornament too, the pinnacles, the spires, the vertical thrust, right? All of that is very typical of Gothic stuff. And and all of that is greater than an original Gothic building would have appeared, right? So like, for example, they have a lot of modern advances in this piece, right? Original Gothic building wouldn't have even had as much, but they did add in kind of this modern element of like an air ventilation shaft, for example, right? So they have added modern twist to it, and again, everything is to make it look Gothic. So it's almost like they put so much Gothic ornament into this, it's actually even more Gothic than an original Gothic building would have been, right? So, definitely interesting. So as far as the whole entire palace, it has over 1,100 rooms in the palace. If you want to add all of it up, right? It has 100 staircases and 2 miles of corridors, right? So this is huge. I mean, this is a really big palace. I know sometimes the floor plan doesn't really do it justice, but it is enormous. And this takes up a good bit of London. I mean, this is right in the middle of London too. So Big Ben, right, that clock tower, and it's obviously made very large so all can see, everybody knows what time it is, right? You have that central lobby, again, we talked about, situated between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And it had a central octagonal space, it was octagonal, right, like San Vital, if you guys remember. And you guys saw the statues of different monarchs, kings and queens of the past, right? You would see statues of all of them, right? You know, on the outer part of the hall, much like the Capitol building, right, with a bunch of famous Americans. Now, what's kind of interesting about that central lobby there, right? Remember the central lobby? There it is, what we're talking about right here. What's interesting about that is there's metal grills on the doorways. I don't know if you guys can see. Hard to see, but there's metal grills on the doorways. Can't really see. Anyway, but they originally were placed where women could actually, while they worked in the palace, they could watch the proceedings, right? Now, these have become symbols of the suffrage movement. Now, you know, they're placed there so it's a constant reminder that, you know what, women are allowed to vote as well, much like men. And so they're kind of reminders there of how women couldn't really participate like men could. You know, it's kind of more difficult for them. Their job, their expectation was to be working, not to be involved in politics, right? Also in the inside of the central lobby, there are 4 mosaics, one of each part of the kingdom. It was located in different, 4 different parts here. So this is one of the mosaics right here. There's another mosaic, and on the other side there would have been a mosaic, right? And it represents the 4 different parts of the kingdom, like Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and then England, right? Those are the 4 different parts of their kingdom. So they'd have mosaics that represented all 4. Westminster Hall, this one right here, right? The original Gothic hall. like I said, is the oldest section, the only original part of the building still standing. And it's going to inspire the rest of Westminster when they went to rebuild it. It's going to include a lot of those Gothic rounded arches, the flying buttresses, right? If you guys can see that, see the flying buttresses up here. You got the rounded arches, right? Very, very, very Gothic of them, right? So again, functionality, this is where the House of Lords and the Commons meet. They discuss laws, right? So this is still very much functional. It's very much used. And again, this is a reaction against art as a mass-produced product of industry. They wanted this to look handcrafted. All of this looks handcrafted, and that's what Gothic art really looked like. And so this is that reaction against industry that is pouring into Britain at this time. They're like, look, we're not going to create a piece, or we're not going to create a building that is typical of industry. We don't want to look like a factory made this. We want to make this to look like it was handcrafted. There's nothing more British than that, right? That's what they did. So like I said, it was rebuilt. There was a competition over who designed it, and obviously these two guys went out, Charles Barry and A.W.N. Eugene. All right, so let's get to the last piece here. Got about 15 more minutes, a little less. And this is our good friend, Louis Daguerre, right? And I'm going to move this real quick. So Louis Daguerre is kind of going to be our first guy involved in photography, right? So, but photography, I mean, he's the guy that's going to, I should say, he's going to popularize photography. Photography actually happens before the 1800s. Photography actually was something that came about 200 years before. So the first attempts at photography actually go back to the 1600s, right? And they used this thing called the camera obscura. And it was a device used that, and what they would do is they would focus certain images in a box, right, so that artists could actually render accurate copies of the scene before them. Well, what they mean by that is, so they would take this device, right, and they would focus certain images, right, within the box. They would bring the images up to the box, and they would try to create copies of that scene before them with each time, right? So that was kind of the first attempt at photography. Obviously, it was very crudely done. It didn't gain a lot of steam. Later, you're going to come up with, they're going to have what's called photograms that are going to be introduced. And basically what this is paper that could replicate this. It would basically reproduce the silhouette of something, an object, right? When it would then be exposed to light. So there's this use of light, right? The only problem here is, right, it would only capture the actual outlines of what it was trying to capture. So again, it's a very kind of crude, attempt. You didn't really get to see the whole thing, much like what we saw with the camera obscura. You can only see parts. You couldn't get the whole, what we'll end up calling a photograph, right? So modern photography gets invented in the 1800s. So we move into the 1800s, right? And it gets invented in two different places at the exact same time, France and England. So with the French, right, we're going to focus mostly on daguerreotype, Louis Daguerre, right? He's going to create photography that is much sharper, a much better focus, a very clear image, right? So for the first time, we're not just getting an outline of something, right, or only part of something. We're now getting the whole thing, and it's very, very clear. And then in England, right, they called it a calotype. And in this case, this was a more less costly approach to photography. And it did come with a negative, right, with a copy basically, but it was really poor quality. It was not real clear. So you kind of had to, pay more to get a clearer picture. If you weren't interested in a clear, crisp picture, well, then you paid less, right? So France and England are kind of vying for this new, right, invention, this new form of technology, and that is photography, right? So let's talk about Louis Daguerre, because we're not going to look at a calotype, right? We're going to look at a daguerreotype. This is our first picture, right? Our first photo. There's going to be more photos coming, but this is our first, so this is kind of significant here. So the first daguerreotype is in 1837, right? And he shows this in an academy, right? So students that are learning artistic trade. I'm going to tell you right now, photography was not, many people in the world did not consider photography an art. It did not gain legitimacy until later. So Daguerre fought to make photography an art. People looked at it as more science. This is a technology. This is not art. This is scientific technology that you're creating. And he's like, no, this is an art form. So he fought for this to be considered an art, but it was a tough fight for him. The French government, they're going to buy the rights to photography. They definitely saw the use in it, especially like for military purposes. I mean, can you imagine, right? And so the way he would do this is one single image on a polished silver-plated copper sheet. So he would use a copper sheet, right? No negatives in this case, therefore he can't make any copies. That's kind of the downside of this. But he created a very crisp, clear image, right? It would take about 10 to 20 minutes for the photograph to come to appear, right? You guys ever taken a Polaroid, right? Polaroid photo, you know, and it takes like a minute and you're like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever. Did it not work? You know, and of course, you know, what did we all do in the 80s with Polaroids? Right? We shook it, right? We shook it like a Polaroid picture, right? Like Outcast says. Anyway, but yeah, so I mean, photography uses chemicals, you know, and that's what they did. And so that's why a lot of people consider this more of a science than an art. Louis Daguerre says, why can't it be both, right? So, but very few of Daguerre types still survive. They say less than 25 photographs are Daguerre type, right? So we don't have a lot left. But one we do have left, this one right here, Still Life in Studio. And this is a creepy, dark piece, right? This is why we go Romanticism here with this piece, because not only is it during the time of Romanticism, but it's creepy, right? But it's that still life, man. It's like, okay, we're literally taking a photo of a moment caught in time, right? And so this is you know, a studio, an art studio here, and he took a picture of it. And this is what we see. So I always tell people this is like creepy to me. You know, you get these heads, right? But it's not meant to be creepy, really. Anyways, so that's the piece we're gonna look at there. So photography starts to become very, very, very popular. Photography will be first used in military battle in the Civil War. Of course, this is a great example here where people would actually, photographers would move bodies and limbs and stuff to get a certain shot. And this is a great example here of Timothy Sullivan, a well-renowned Civil War photographer. He was known to do that. And nowadays that's illegal. Like, you can't touch dead bodies on a battlefield, thank God, right? But he took this photograph and literally moved bodies to get just the right angle. That was very common in the Civil War. There were like no laws at that time. So they would do that. So anyway, so these are daguerreotypes, right? Daguerreotypes created a very shiny surface that would allow for a much more detailed, more crisp, clear, precise image, right? Again, he used that highly polished silver-plated sheet of copper. So he used copper to create this crisp clearness. Now, again, because he's doing it this way, you cannot produce a negative. So that's going to change later down the road as the technology gets better. It is in black and white, right? Black and white. There's no color to the original photography. Again, that'll change later as we move on. But guys, the thing about a photograph is, man, this is real life, man. This is you know, in its you know, state, right? But you know, photography, it reproduces textures that maybe sometimes art can't reproduce, that like a painting can't reproduce. Photography can do that, right? Whereas a painting can't. So it's creating a new art that creates even more realism, right? It really creates more of that, right? And again, you know, photography is going to be inspired a lot of times by those still life paintings, those vanitas paintings, right? Very much inspired by that. And that's kind of how photography came to be. All these photographers are very much interested in still life paintings, you know, and they're like, well, what if I can create like an actual picture, right? You know, of what it actually is without me sitting here repainting it. They didn't have to do that, right? So that's pretty cool. So what's the function? They want to elevate photography to making it an art, right? That's kind of the main goal here. Create as the most accurate thing possible, right, through photography. Again, you know, you have a long exposure. The problem with this, so you can't record movement, right? So there's no movement involved here. However, you are creating accuracy. Um, so in this particular piece, right, we're relying on a skylight above the studio coming in, providing for that light. So there's a little bit of tenebrism here, right? Even though he's not creating this on purpose, but he's capturing this moment, right? That light is allowing us to see, right, what this studio looks like, right? So like you said, he fills the photo with a lot of like plaster casts of angels' heads, as you can see, which is kind of creepy. But a lot of plaster casts all around, right? As far as context go, this was produced in 1837. And again, there are less than 25 daguerreotypes that exist today due to a fire. It destroyed all of them. So this is a new art form proclaiming, you know, while at the same time referencing older art forms. So, you know, it'll reference those Vanitas paintings, right? But it's a new art form in the same token. So it's very romantic, right? This idea of taking an idea and just modernizing it, right? We've seen a lot of that in the 1800s. So this is no different. So I'm going to stop sharing because we are done there. And all right, so that is the rest of the romantic pieces, guys. Like I said, I'm going to place some discussion questions along with this video. The link to this video, you'll find this on YouTube. I will put this on YouTube on a YouTube page that I have. Yeah, and so you'll be able to not miss anything. That's kind of the goal here, so that you guys can get everything that you need. All right. So that is that. On Monday, we're going to pick up with, we're going to move to another art style. And that art style is we're moving into that late 19th century art. And we're going to go to this little thing called realism. And we're going to see, you know, what life is like for not just the nobility, but even the poor. And that becomes kind of the focus there. All right. So it's been fun. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday. All right. Have a great day.